late, but you know, we're not on a terribly tight schedule here. So I'm Lois, I'm the owner of the Baldpate Inn, and we're thrilled to have you here today, and especially our live audience. So thank you all for making the effort to come up and be socially distanced with us and wear your masks and all that good stuff. So we're glad to have you here. Just a couple notes for you on your chairs, and those of you at home. Summer in the Keys is coming up next weekend. We got 4th of July this weekend. Summer in the Keys is next weekend. It's always a fun event, so you know, break out your sandals and your sunglasses and your squirt guns and come on up, and we'll have a fun time. I don't think we're going to do a slip and slide, but you never know. So it'll be fun what we come up with. We also have updated our Summer Enchanted schedule, so you're going to see some new speakers on there in the next couple of weeks, so check that out online on our website, or ask at the desk and we'll get that out to you. I would like to thank Marlene for coming back. She is one of our most favored speakers, and we were just laughing that last year we crammed almost 90 people in here, and today we're having to be a little more skimpy. So, but I know it's going to be as fascinating. And I told her that every time she talks, I go home and I think, and then I never do. But I come back to the talk every year, so I'm hopefully sinking some stuff in. And I was just laughing about, you know, we introduced her as a wildflower expert, but actually, when you read her bio, I mean, she's climbed mountains, she's done all this stuff, written books, so she's more than just the flower lady. She's, I would say, somebody pretty special to Estes Park in Colorado. So thank you, Marlene, for being here. Let's give her a hand.
Thank you. Well, you're all here, I'm sure, because you enjoy wildflowers, and it is hard to miss the wildflowers this time of year. They're on the trails, they're on the roadsides, they're in our yards if we live here. So it's very fun to enjoy them and learn about them. So thank you for coming tonight. And as Laura said, I'm Marlene. And no, I'm not a botanist. I'm actually a retired social worker. But after decades of climbing mountains here, I always noticed the flowers. I took photographs. I learned their common names. But about 15 years ago, I decided I wanted to know more. I wanted to know about flower families and how they were related to each other, their habitats. So I started taking courses at the CSU Extension Office, and their classes and their field trips. And I joined the Colorado Native Plant Society and also took their classes and field trips, and finally earning my Native Plant Master certification. So that was all fun and really led me to learn more about them. And I love sharing what I've learned with others because I think it's a very satisfying and challenging activity. But I will tell you one thing I learned is you can't combine peak bagging with wildflowering. It just doesn't work. You know, if you peak bagging, you're going to go fast and light for a summit. If you're looking for wildflowers, you're going to spend time with them because it really does take time to see a flower. So I don't try to combine climbing a peak with flowering, but once in a while if I see something, I will stop, and my husband's way ahead going, "Where are you?" And I'm going, I have to stop. But you really do enjoy seeing them, and it's fun when you start to identify them and know what they are. But the positive thing about that is you can learn to use botany without being a botanist. By, again, taking some courses or reading some books. And the most thing I find I've learned is when I'm really out there and I'm questioning things, and I go back and look in my field guides and figure it out. So all this led me to do 3 pack guides for the Colorado Mountain Club. And the first one I did was Rocky Mountain Wildflowers. And this is a pack guide that you identify flowers by color, like a lot of guides. But I do put in about the flower's habitat, the characteristics of the flower, so you can better identify the exact species you're looking at. And then I wrote the best Front Range wildflower hikes, and that showcases 22 hikes here on the Front Range from Colorado Springs to Fort Collins, from the plains to the alpine. And last year I wrote Rocky Mountain alpine flowers. I just really feel the alpine is a very special environment here in Colorado. You know, it's a land without trees. And so Colorado has more areas of tundra than anywhere else here in the lower 48. So I thought these flowers deserve their own pack guide. So that was a fun one to do. I'm sure you're all here because you've been out on the trails looking for wildflowers, right? Or seeing them as you go hike. And I'm sure you have your favorites. I know I have my favorites. I like this quote, especially in the times we are in now with uncertainty, because I find the wildflowers are going to come up no matter what, and they will not disappoint us. So it was something this spring I thought about looking forward to, and I was getting out my own books and my field guides and thinking of places I wanted to go this summer to find certain flowers. So it just gave real hope to this coming season and summer. And it also reminded me that native plants are very resourceful and very resilient and persistent, much like we find ourselves having to be right now. So again, it kind of gave me a little boost this spring to get this program together. So how many of you have been out on the trails? And you're looking for wildflowers in particular?
She does.
Good. What are some of your favorites?
I've been interested in local weed. I know it's just different. We're from Texas, so
Yes.
there are a lot of things here that don't exist in Texas.
It's fun seeing flowers that are different. It's fun traveling to different countries and places to see different wildflowers. And what I've learned is they're still connected. They still probably belong to the same family that we have here. They're just a different cousin. And so that's real fun to find something.
Blue pines here are almost the same as the blue bonnets in Texas.
You're right, blue bonnets are lupins, and our lupins are just a little different species, so a very pretty flower. So my intent tonight with this program is to maybe spark your interest if you're a beginner in wildflowering, or if you're a veteran, I hope to add a little something to your knowledge. So here in Colorado, the climate is determined by layers of altitude, and plants grow within these layers of altitude called life zones. And here in Colorado, we have 5 life zones, from the plains to the alpine. The plains start about 3,300 feet. The foothills goes up to about 8,000 feet. Your montane zone goes to 10,500 feet. Subalpine to 11,500. And the alpine zone here in Colorado goes from 11,500 to 14,431 feet, which is our highest point in Colorado, which is, what's the highest point in Colorado? No, Mount Elbert. That's the highest 14er in Colorado. So that's where our alpine stops. And plants, these boundaries, they cross over a lot. You may have a field guide that says a certain flower grows in the montane zone. You're likely to see it in the subalpine, especially with some climate change. So there are no clear boundaries between these life zones. And I always say flowers don't read books, so they don't know they're supposed to have limitations. You know, sometimes I see a flower that's supposed to be pink and it'll be white. So it's kind of fun that nature does what it does. Habitats are important to know in learning flowers. Colorado's very diverse in habitats, which gives us a lot of different flowers here in this state. From tundra, scree slopes, woodlands, wetlands, streamsides, meadows. We have canyons, shrublands, prairies out east, and even disturbed areas by flood, fires, animals, and man. So habitats are very important to be aware of, because if you know the habitat where a certain flower likes to plant its feet, that gives you a head start where to go to look for that flower. So reading about their habitats and exploring those, you may find the flower you want to. And a question I get asked a lot is, when does a certain flower bloom? Well, we certainly have our early spring flowers here, April, May, the first week of June. We have midsummer flowers that like to bloom in July. And we even have some late bloomers for August and September. But there's a lot of variables to blooming times within those, I call them seasons within seasons. Elevation has a play in it. What's the temperature this spring, summer? Is it cooler? Is it hotter? That's going to affect blooming times. Precipitation, including this past year's snowpack, can affect what blooms when. Wind and storms, and again, soil conditions that may have changed due to some minor flooding or a fire. But you know, for me, every year when the summer rolls around or early spring, I just find those variables and ever-changing wildflower blooms makes each year very new and challenging for me. I can go to the same location the same day that I did last year, expecting to find a certain flower in bloom. I may find that flower past bloom. I may find it just has buds, or I may not find that flower at all this year. You know, things change, and so for me, it makes every year pretty exciting to go out and see if I'm going to find certain things in places I have before. And I might find something new. So that's always fun too. I go, oh my gosh, what's this doing here? And so it gets very fun and challenging to keep going in a certain area and see what's blooming. For me, I say the bottom line, nature's in charge of blooming time. Okay. Need a change in slide. There it is. So I really can't do these talks without mentioning wildflower ethics, which I'm sure most of you are aware of.
Well, we know it exists.
Yes. So I'm not quite sure why it's not keeping the slide up. So all living organisms need to reproduce, and picking and digging up wildflowers will reduce a plant's ability to reproduce and will affect its long-term survival in that location. And picking wildflowers can adversely affect pollinators and other animals that depend on that species for food and/or shelter. Picking wildflowers prevents other visitors from enjoying our natural environment and maybe seeing a very rare special plant. And most wildflowers wilt and perish soon after being picked anyway, and most do not survive being transplanted, especially our native lilies and orchids. So I always borrow a quote from a very knowledgeable person here in Colorado, if I can bring it up. Okay. Okay, skip mine. So Al Schneider, he lives down south. He has a quote: "Admire them in the wild and let them live." And that's what I go by, and I take a bazillion photos, and that's how I bring these wildflowers home with me. So we all need plants to survive, and plants have a scientific classification from kingdom to species. And I certainly use common names. I use them all the time. One, scientific names can be difficult to pronounce. They're Greek or Latin. But it's very important to at least recognize the scientific name and be aware of it for clear communication. So the flower in the right-hand corner here, you may go out on a hike and come home and say to a friend, "I saw a one-sided penstemon today on such and such trail." Your neighbor or friend may be thinking of a slightly different species than the one you actually saw. There's about 60 species of penstemon in Colorado and about 21 here on the Front Range, and a lot of them grow on one side of the stem or one-sided. But if you go home to your friend or neighbor and say, "I saw a penstemon vagatus," maybe they don't recognize that name, but they can look it up and they'll know exactly what species you saw in that trail and won't be confused. So knowing or being aware of the scientific name is very important for clear communication. And there are about 155 flowering families in Colorado with many species within those families. So you can see how easily it is to get confused of penstemons and paintbrushes if you don't explain the scientific or use the scientific name. So if you want to become more serious about wildflowers beyond the common name and learn the exact species of plants, what tools do you need? Well, books with keys, and what I mean by that is a more extensive field guide. Like I use Acrophil's Flora of Colorado. It's a big book. I never usually take it hiking with me. Or Bill Weber's Colorado Flora Eastern Slope. He's been around for a long time. He just passed away last year at 90-some. But these two are very good field guides with keys in them, and I'll explain what keys is in a minute. A hand lens is very important. I have one here. Little hand lens. You can make a little thing to put around your neck if you want. And this one has a light, so it's very handy. Because the keys might say something like, there are fine hairs around the margins of the leaves. You most likely won't be able to see those fine hairs without a hand lens. So a very important tool. I take a little notebook with me because a lot of times you don't have time to really key out a flower right there on the trail you want to go on. But I take notes: what habitat I am. Am I in a marsh? Am I in a dry hillside? And what elevation? What do the petals look like as far as how many, what color, leaf arrangement, what are the leaf shape? And then I'm likely to go home and be able to identify that flower later. I take a camera. I take a lot of photos. Here's a tip. Always take a photo of the backside of the petals and on the bracts and stem, because again, the keys may say something like, they are purple streaks on the backside of the petals. Well, if you don't look or take a photo, because I probably would forget, then you'll stop right there in that key to be able to know the exact species of that flower. And I think it's fun to take a friend. You can discuss, hopefully not argue, on which species you think it is and why. And sometimes a friend sees things that you might miss. So it's a very fun activity to do with friends. Family characteristics. Like most of our families, each flower in families has their own particular characteristics to look for. And if you know the characteristics of about a dozen families, that will help you identify most of the plants here on the Front Range. And there's a list out there called the 19 Big Families. And what I mean by that is the families in this area, the Front Range, that has the most species in it. So like the sunflower family is a big family here. The pea family is a big family. The mustard family. They have a lot of species here in Rocky Mountain National Park and along our Front Range. And once you know what family a flower belongs to, you can skip the family keys and go right to that family and to start finding the exact species. So again, knowing some of the characteristics is very helpful. So for example, what family do you think these three flowers belong to on the top of the screen? Composite? That is a description, yes. The family is the sunflower family, Asteraceae family. And what tells you these flowers belong to the sunflower family? What tells you that? Well, yes. So one of the characteristics of the sunflower family is it has ray flowers and or disc flowers. So the ray flowers are these. The disc flowers are these tiny, there's hundreds and hundreds of tiny flowers here. So those are disc flowers. And notice I said and or. The flower here only has disc flowers, no ray flowers, and that is the flower. This flower has no disc flowers, just ray flowers, but they're all in the sunflower family. So I know that. So what's the dichotomous keys? There's simply a series of paired questions about the plant you want to identify, giving two successive pair of choices to choose from. You choose the one that fits the flower you're looking at, finally arriving at the species you have in front of you. I'll give you an example. I'm using Weber's book, Colorado Flora, Eastern Slope, and I come upon, say I want to ID this flower on the left. And I say, wow, it's in the sunflower family. I know that. It has all these ray flowers. So I go right to the sunflower family in this guidebook. I go to key A, and it's going to have 1A and 1B. I read 1A, flowers blue, pink, purple, or white. Does that fit my flower? No. So I go to 1B. It says flowers yellow or orange. Yeah. So 1B tells me to go all the way to key 9. And it'll have 9A and 9B. And you continue with those descriptions, looking at your flower and saying, wow, yeah, it's this one. And then it'll tell you to go to another key. And that's kind of how these keys work until you finally come to the species that fits your flower. And this flower here is a wavy leaf dandelion. That one's the alpine sunflower, also called what? What's the nickname for the alpine sunflower? Old Man of the Mountain. And I'll tell you why later. And this is a nodding ragwort. And this, some people think the flower hasn't bloomed yet, but this is the flower. Again, it only has disc flowers. Fun plants to find. So we'll be patient. There we go. No. Sometimes do you think it's because we live in the mountains and sometimes the internet is not friendly to us?
It's very true.
No. Don't think it likes my computer. Should I exit and start over?
Let's just check this again.
It's working great. I don't know what happened.
Technology.
Well, ma'am, while we're waiting,
Yes.
why did they call it Old Man of the Mountain?
Oh, I have a slide on that, so I was hoping to wait and
I'm
show you.
sorry. Okay.
There is I have some little funny things about these. Somebody said I should write a book on. There's a book about high country names, why the peaks are named, why they're named around here.
Oh, yeah.
That I should do a book on why the flowers are named, why they're named. That could be an interesting little book. If we can't get this up, I will tell you why Old Man of the Mountain is named that.
Have you noticed anything unusual this year that you're
stuck out?
Well, we've all been talking about how dry the tundra is this year because we didn't get any snow in February and it's been rather dry. The flowers are definitely blooming earlier, so I hate to think maybe come mid-July they'll be gone because they're definitely blooming, but that depends on the life zone. That's happening in the alpine, but I find the subalpine pretty good right now.
But it's hard because you have to really because you have to take on yeah, and so there's two as a man. If it was just me, I would just and I don't like the weird.
There's a lot going on out there. There's a lot of ways
Tucson is like Estes. It's just slow, we call it a cow town.
Do you have
Okay.
keynote though? I don't know the way a keynote on that machine is a problem. Let's try that out one more time.
This,
Yeah, Apple TV. Yeah.
Very historic.
there we go.
Oh,
Alright.
Well, let's see how long it lasts.
You like it?
It was a good break. So, Pawnee, I'll give you some suggestions of good hikes that is around on the Front Range. It's a little too late to do Pawnee National Grasslands now, but in May and about to the first week of June, it really comes alive with colors. Some people think, oh, the plains out there are just pretty dull and bland. But again, come April, May, and June, they just are alive with these colors. This is the West Pawnee Butte. It's like a 3-mile hike round trip, so it's a real short hike out there. You can go to the east one as well. It's on private land, just stay on the trail. But you see these perky Sues in the foreground. You'll also see large mounds and mats of this silky milk vetch that grows out on the sandy floor. And this is a prickly Gilia in the right bottom corner. It likes to bloom in the evening and with these beautiful gold flowers, and it has a really sweet fragrance out there. It's in the phlox family. Other things you may see on the plains are, here's a close-up of the perky Sues. The plains flax, which I think is a beautiful little flower, is kind of an orange sherbet color with this deep red center. And it's in the same family as the blue flax that's blooming right now here on the Front Range in the montane and foothills. And the white penstemon, which is quite uncommon, it likes to bloom out there in the Pawnee National Grasslands in the plains. So something to look forward to next year and put on your list is get there about the last 2 weeks of May. Beautiful flowers there. And the foothills, where grasslands give way to ponderosa forests and shrubs. These early bloomers, spring flowers in April, May, and June in the foothills. Past flowers, spring beauties. About April, May, here in Estes Park along Lumpy Ridge, you'll see these flowers. Other flowers in the spring in the foothills is our wallflower, salsify, and the Colorado loco. We have 2 species here in the park. This is Colorado loco. We also have the white loco, which you see on Bear Lake Road right now. It is a pretty plant. It belongs to the pea family. And the montane zone gives way to lodgepole pines, spruce and aspen forests, and it's also characterized by cooler temperatures. I describe Estes Park itself as a transition zone between the foothills and the montane. We're right kind of there in the middle. Once you get into the park, you're pretty much in the montane zone. You'll see things like fireweed, yellow monkey flowers, and tall chiming bells. They're also called streamside bluebells.
How tall are they?
The streamside, the tall ones, can be about 3 feet tall, and they grow in the subalpine mostly, lower montane, upper montane, and subalpine plant. We do have a smaller chiming bell. It's called the lanceleaf or prairie bluebell that grows here around Estes and in the foothills. It grows about 8 inches tall, so it's a smaller chiming bell, and it has smaller blue bell-shaped flowers on it. So we have 2 species on the Front Range of chiming bells. Golden banner, you still see that blooming right now, and miner's candle are other 2 common flowers here on the Front Range. Have you all seen the miner's candle? They're about everywhere right now on trails, and they can grow up to about 1 foot high. They're really fun to see when they're that high, and obviously they get its name from the shape of the flower, and the brightness looks like a miner's candle. It's very tall and straight cylinder. One of my favorite trails in Rocky Mountain National Park in the montane zone is the Tanahutu Trail. And Tanahutu is an Arapaho word for big meadow. And you certainly are hiking along this big meadow the entire way. It's about 5.8 miles one way, and I like to do it as a one-way hike. You can do it with a car shuttle. Park a car at the Kawanichi Valley Visitor Center and drive another car back to the Green Mountain Trailhead, and then you have about 5.8 miles back to the Kawanichi Visitor Center. And because it's located on the west side, which the west side of the divide receives more precipitation, it results in a lusher and thicker vegetation over there, and you're going to get different species than you do here on the Front Range, like this western red columbine. You might be even lucky enough to see 4-legged species, like these 5 bull moose in Big Meadow. I think they were eating elephant heads, bistork, and some grasses that day. So that's a very diverse hike. You have water, you have some pine forest, so you see lots of species over there. The subalpine, I describe that as a transition zone where forests of the montane give way to more alpine vegetation, like your subalpine firs, your bristlecone pines, and many stunted trees in the subalpine, edging into the alpine because of the severe weather conditions and growing seasons. And these stunted trees here in the foreground are called krummholz, and it's a German word for crooked wood. And what happens is seeds from the subalpine firs and spruces blow up to the subalpine and alpine areas, but because of the harsh weather and conditions and the short growing season, they cannot grow to tall trees. The branches start rooting along the ground, and they do become very entangled and crooked, and that's krummholz. And as a hiker, I would say avoid hiking through them, because again, they're crooked wood, they're very tangly and scratchy, and it's very difficult to get through a patch of krummholz. But very important to the habitat, they provide shelter for other plants and also for animals. Ptarmigans love to nest around krummholz. Does everybody know what a ptarmigan is? Ptarmigans are an alpine bird. Another hike I love in the subalpine alpine areas is Silver Dollar Lake. This trail is located above Georgetown off of Gonella Pass, and it's about 4 miles round trip, so kind of a short hike, but a lot of wildflowers. I would say about 80 species on peak bloom. So from bottom to top, you're going to see lots of flowers. I remember at the trailhead, there's a whole patch of flowers there, sneezeweed, and I love sneezeweed. It's a bright orange composite that just really makes you happy to look at it. So, and from there on, you see lots of flowers on this trail. And if you want a little longer hike, a half-mile above Silver Dollar Lake is a lake called Murray Lake. And again, you're going to get alpine flowers there. It sits at 12,000 feet. And in August, you will see several species of gentian along this trail. You'll probably see the northern gentian, the French gentian, and the Perry gentian. And about mid-August, you'll start seeing the Arctic gentian. So it's a fun, diverse hike. Butler Gulch is another hike well known for over 100 species of wildflowers in peak bloom. And this is located by Berthoud Pass on the west side. And it's 5 miles round trip out and back. And I will warn you, you might get your feet wet. There's a couple stream crossings on this trail. But it's well worth it because you come to these high meadows filled with wildflowers with the Continental Divide as a backdrop. Perry primrose and the mountain laurel are blooming now, and there are other very common flowers in the subalpine zone. I just saw Perry primrose, they're just starting to bloom, and the mountain laurel has been blooming. The alpine, probably my favorite life zone. I just think there are very diverse flowers that grow in the alpine. And alpine is the land above trees, above about 11,500 feet. And I call the flowers that grow in the alpine tundra masters of survival and adaptation. Like the alpine forget-me-nots, alpine phlox, big-rooted spring beauty. They face many challenges growing at that altitude. One, they have a very short growing season, just really about 60 days. They have to endure low temperatures. They're exposed to very strong winds and storms, and often drought conditions on the tundra. So how do they cope with all that and come back every summer and give us these beautiful blooms on the tundra? Well, I'm sure all of you have been hiking on the tundra, maybe hiking or driving up Trail Ridge Road, or maybe Mount Evans, so you've seen the tundra. Have you ever seen any tall flowers above 11,000 feet? No, they're all very short growing, maybe only an inch or two, maybe 8 inches. So when those strong winds blow out of the west and storms, they don't blow these flowers down, they simply blow over them. So being very small, low growing to the ground helps them cope with all the strong winds and storms. And also, most of the flowers up there have fine hairs covering the leaves and stems, and some even the back of the flower itself. And that helps trap moisture and heat for the flower, those fine hairs. And most of the flowers up there have very long taproots, sometimes 12 to 15 feet deep, and they spread out to help find water, but it also keeps them anchored to that thin soil on the tundra. So I do find them fascinating, and I call them masters of survival and adaptation. Also, I find the alpine tundra very interesting because it has communities within that ecosystem. There are fell fields, which is simply a field of rocks on tundra slopes, usually very dry and windy, but that's where you find these tiny cushion plants like the phlox and the forget-me-nots. There are snow beds on the tundra where snow persists late into summer, and these hardy plants can even grow under the snow and bloom through the snow like the alpine buttercup. There are boulder fields. If any of you have been on Longs Peak, you see the big boulder field before the keyhole. It's simply an area of large boulders strewn over each other with pockets of dirt blown in between the boulders, and it's warmed by the sun, catches rain. These boulders provide great shelter for plants. I always think of the Sky Pilot when I think of boulder fields. There are talus and scree slopes, and these are steeper slopes with smaller gravel weathered down, but plants find a home between this warm scree, and their roots actually help stabilize the ever-moving rocky slope on scree slopes. So if you've ever been hiking down a scree slope, you know it kind of moves with you. You almost kind of ski down. But plants like this dwarf mountain ragwort, it can spread out. It's a low-growing plant, but it spreads out quite wide, 2, 3, 4 feet. And you can kind of see how those roots are spreading out, helping to stabilize that slope. There's alpine meadows, where taller plants grow, sheltered by rolling dips in the tundra. There's usually less wind, more soil, and room to spread out. And often they grow in large patches with grasses filling in. This is an arrowleaf ragwort, and you can see it's probably 10 feet long and a couple feet wide, a large patch of it in an alpine meadow. Alpine has marshes and bogs. It's where flattening slopes at the bottom of the mountainside and melting snow off the mountainside feeds the ground below where it has flattened out, and that often stays wet all summer. And so plants that enjoy being wet and cold, that's where they find their home, like marsh marigolds and globeflowers. They grow in alpine marshes. So the tundra is a very unique ecosystem in the mountains. Orchids. Some people are very surprised to hear orchids in the high country of Colorado. And the orchid family is the largest flowering family with about 30,000 species worldwide of orchids. So I think it's only fair Colorado gets to call about 26 species home. And these are terrestrial orchids, meaning they grow in the ground and soil. And the orchid family has the most rare and endangered species than any other flowering family. The spotted coreroot, I don't want to say these are common orchids because I think all of our native orchids are rare and pretty special. But the ones you're most likely to see on the trails is the spotted coreroot orchid. It's blooming now, and usually it will be this brownish reddish stem, but there's a couple of varieties of the spotted coreroot. It can also be a bright yellow or an orangey color. It's still the spotted coreroot. It may have lighter spots than this wine colored spots. And then we have two species of the giant rattlesnake plankton orchid. And the most common is the giant one that you see here on the right-hand side and in the middle. And once you know this orchid's leaf, you'll see it everywhere. The giant rattlesnake has basal leaves, that means growing at the base of the stem. They're dark evergreen with this white midrib running down the center. You see there? And again, once you recognize the leaf, this orchid is pretty common in Rocky Mountain National Park, and you'll start seeing it on the trail sides. The picture on the right-hand side is showing before it blooms. The one in the middle, it has creamy white flowers on it, very tiny flowers. It grows to about 10 inches high is the highest. Usually they're about 5 inches tall. And the insert is the dwarf rattlesnake plankton orchid. It's very rare. I have not seen the flower, but you can see the leaves here of the dwarf rattlesnake plankton orchid. The leaf pattern resembles a rattlesnake skin. That's how it got its name.
Habitat.
You know, it's usually in the upper montane subalpine zones, and they do like northeast facing slopes, so it's kind of holds the moisture and shady. So I see the rattlesnake lots of places in Rocky. I see it along the Fern Lake Trail. Again, those switchbacks that are facing east, and so they're kind of shady for a long time and in the forest. But you see it, once you recognize those leaves, you go, oh my gosh, there's rattlesnake plankton here. And here's the yellow coral root. There's 4 species of coral roots in the park, in Rocky Mountain National Park. There's about 7 in Colorado, but 4 here. And often the spotted coral root, the yellow variety, people mistake it for the true yellow coral root, which is a different species, is Triida. And it's more of a green yellow orchid color, and usually it's lip petal. On orchids, they have a lip petal. It's usually all white. It might be faintly spotted, and you probably could only see those spots with a hand lens. And it's kind of an uncommon orchid to see. It's out there. It likes upper montanes, mostly subalpine. It likes wet areas, wet, shady forest. It's sometimes covered by grasses, so they're very hard to see because they're in tall grasses. But they're a fun orchid to find here in Rocky. Other orchids you're likely to see starting to bloom about right now is the white bog orchid and the green bog orchid. And there's 2 species of each of these in Rocky and on the Front Range. And I would say the bog orchid is the hardest one to identify its exact species because they look so much alike. Again, there's 2 species of white and 2 species of green. And how you key those out is they talk about the length and the shape of the lip petal. And again, the lip petal is right there. And so it's the lip petal, this shape and length. And also bog orchids have a spur behind the lip petal. And the keys we'll talk about is the spur longer than the lip petal or shorter. So that's, again, hand lens, very important to see how the size of the lip petal and the spur to be able to say exactly which species this bog orchid is. Some rare orchids, again, I consider most of our native orchids rare, but the calypso orchid, also called fairy slipper orchid, and all these have the name slipper to their name because the lip petal here forms like a slipper. So that's how it gets its name. And orchids have 3 petals, the lip petal, and they have 2 petals there and 3 sepals. This orchid is now already bloomed here. It's pretty past. The brownie lady slipper orchid, also called the clustered lady slipper orchid, is still blooming. And the yellow lady slipper orchid is not only on a rare list in Colorado, it's on the endangered list, primarily because people have tried to dig it up and transplant it. It's also lost habitat due to water diversions and development. So if you do find these flowers, again, take a lot of photos, take them home with you that way, so they'll still be there for others to see. The heartleaf twayblade orchid, it's kind of one of my favorite little orchids. It grows anywhere from 2 to 6 inches, so it's a very tiny orchid. It is hard to find because it's green. The flower is greenish, kind of a translucent green. But a well-known Colorado botanist, Joyce Gilhorn, she nicknamed this orchid Dancing Ladies. And I really thank her for passing that nickname along. So here's the flower. And the lip petal splits at the end, forming 2 legs. The lip petal has 2 appendages here, looking like arms. The other 2 petals and sepals kind of form the head. And can't you see dancing ladies? I can never look at this orchid. That's what comes to my mind immediately. So it's kind of fun to share that. Other rare wildflowers we have here is the spurless blue columbine. Have any of you seen the all blue spurless columbine? Well, it's not a different species. It's the same species as our state flower, the Colorado blue columbine. But columbines like hybridization. They just love to hybridize. So they mix with each other, and they have gotten this variety all blue. But here's an all blue one, no spurs. Here's an all blue one with spurs. So again, they do a lot of different things out there, the columbines. And we have the dwarf alpine columbine, also simply called the Rocky Mountain blue columbine. It grows in the alpine. It's blooming now. You can see it. I've seen it on Twin Sisters Peak. It's probably still blooming there. And many high peaks here in Rocky Mountain National Park. It's also in other areas of Colorado and high peaks. But it's a very special flower because it's endemic just to Colorado. It's not known to grow in any other place but Colorado. So have you seen that flower on some of your high peaks? Very nice flower. The wood lily is also become on the rare list, again, because people try to dig them up and transplant them, and they just die. Rock sassafras is a special flower too. It's not only endemic to Colorado, it's endemic to the Front Range of Colorado. So it's not known to grow anywhere else but here on the Front Range. You can see it on Pikes Peak, on the slopes of Pikes Peak. In Rocky Mountain National Park, it's on Lumpy Ridge. It likes to grow in between rock cracks and crevices. Thistles. A lot of people think you hear thistles, you need to dig them up and get rid of them. However, there are 18 native species of thistles in Colorado and only 6 non-native invasive species. So thistles are very important to insects, birds, and browsing wildlife, and it adds diversity to our plant community. So if you have thistles in your yard or know of someone, and find out if it's a native and just leave it if it is. It's very important to our insects and our pollinators. This is a kind of alien looking alpine mountain thistle. It was about 3 foot tall, and I just love its spikes on the head. I call him my alien thistle. Socium scopularome. And I used to think come August there was nothing new to see out there, but I was wrong. Gentians tend to be a late bloomer, and we have about 7 species of gentians on the Front Range. This is the northern gentian. Talk about common names. This little plant, which grows to about maybe 8-9 inches tall, is called the northern gentian, the autumn dwarf gentian. Some people call it love gentian, rose gentian, but it's a pretty little flower, blooming about the 3rd week of July. The star gentian is a subalpine gentian, and the Perry gentian, again, tends to bloom the end of July, and it can bloom all the way through October. The weather's nice. And gentians, one of the characteristics is they're tubular flowers. They kind of grow with in a tubular shape, and they have opposite leaves. The little fringed gentian right here is a very uncommon gentian. It's probably at the most 4 inches high. It likes a subalpine, alpine environment. Fun gentian to find. The fringed gentian likes to keep its feet wet near streams and marshes. And the Arctic gentian is an alpine gentian, usually blooming, I would always say, mid-August through October. However, I have found it blooming the 1st of August these days. And they used to say, when you find the Arctic gentian blooming, winter is not far behind. But I hope that's not too true anymore, because again, I've seen it around the 1st of August. But pretty flower. How many of you have seen the Arctic gentian? Yep, go up on Trail Ridge about the 2nd, 3rd week of August, and it was beautiful last year there. Also, asters are late bloomers. They tend to bloom, again, late July through October. This is the tansy aster and the porter aster. They can go quite tall, 2 or 3 feet high, with these sprawling branch stems. And people ask me, how do you tell an aster from a daisy? You know, they all look kind of the same. They're composites. But there are differences. I just said asters tend to bloom later in the summer. So if you see a composite in April, May, and June, it's usually white or light pink. It's probably a daisy because it's blooming that early. And also daisies tend to have narrow ray flowers, whereas asters have broader, wider ray flowers. So that's another thing you can look at. And my big tip is look behind the petals. These modified leaves are called bracts. And on daisies, they only have 1 or 2 very even straight rows of bracts. That's on a daisy, 1 or 2 rows. But on asters, have several uneven rows of bracts. Kind of reminds me of shingles on a roof. So I always kind of turn the flower over and look at its bracts. And bracts cover the bud and protects the bud before they bloom. American bistorte. How many of you see bistorte? It's quite a common flower, growing all the way from the foothills to the alpine. There is one species that only grows in the alpine, but the American bistorte is also in the alpine. It's a rather hardy plant. How many of you that have seen the bistort have taken the time to smell one? Nobody? Next time you see a bistort, get down and try to smell it. It's also known as minor smelly socks. Some people think it has a rather stinky smell to it. I rather say it has a very pungent odor. But in the high altitudes, there are few bees there, but lots of flies. So what better way to attract your pollinator, if it happens to be a fly, than with a stinky smell? So I think the bistort is a good example, again, of adaptation for survival at high altitudes. Old Man of the Mountain, I haven't forgotten. So Old Man of the Mountain, also called alpine sunflower, is covered with these thick white woolly hairs behind the flower, on the bracts, on the stems and leaves. And I talked about that helps keep moisture in and helps provide heat. And the alpine sun, so that's why it's called Old Man of the Mountain. These thick white woolly hairs reminds people of an old man's beard. That's how it got its nickname. And the alpine sunflower always faces east. It does not track the sun like some sunflowers do. And it's a monocarpic plant. And that means it takes many, many years, sometimes 12 to 15, to mature enough to bloom. And it only blooms once and then it dies. So it only blooms one time. It's like, we also have another monocarpet plant here, the monument plant, the gentian, the eltweed. Some people call it eltweed, the monument plant, the green gentian. It's a very tall plant. It also takes many years, sometimes 20 to 80, I've heard, to mature, and it only blooms once and then dies. So I like to feel that these plants that take so long to mature just gives us the very best at the end. So I'll talk a little bit about pollinators. Who are the pollinators? Well, it's wind, water, animals. It's just about moving the pollen. And again, because Colorado is so diverse in habitats and open spaces, it lends itself to a high diversity of insects too. Our pollinators tend to be higher in this state than any of the other states. And native plants are important to support these pollinators that have adapted some to only one species of plant for food. It has been found that native bees are 4 times as likely to visit native plants than non-native plants. So if you have a garden here or want to start one, I think it's really important to try to stick to a lot of native plants in your garden. One, they're well adapted to this environment, to our temperature and water and soil, so they're likely to succeed. And butterflies and moths, they really like flowers with good landing platforms like penstemon, iris, lilies, the sunflowers. They like moist areas. They love muddy areas. They like to puddle. So provide some muddy areas in your garden. Maybe have a bird bath. It does provide them with waters and also minerals from that. They like to eat rotten fruit and even bird dung. So you don't have to have a really tidy garden or clean garden. Leave some of that for the pollinators. Butterflies and moths like stones and open spaces, bare spots. So again, they can get minerals from the soil and also simply to rest. I was really thrilled. This butterfly here is the Rocky Mountain Parnassian, and its host plant is the yellow stonecrop. And this spring, I was just happened to see is caterpillar. So this is the caterpillar, the larva, that goes with the Rocky Mountain Parnassian butterfly. So moths and butterflies, kind of like asters and daisies. How do you tell if it's a moth or a butterfly? Well, one, moths tend to be more active at night, although I have seen them in the day. Here's a police car moth, and it's called that because of its black and white pattern, and it does have red under the throat, so again, resembling a police car. So moths tend to rest with their wings folded back on their back. So that's one way to maybe identify it's a moth, because butterflies tend to rest with their wings kind of held up. And my big one is looking at the antenna on butterflies and moths. Butterflies have this club or ball-like structure on the end of the antenna, whereas moths tend to have feather-like or a saw edge along the whole antenna here. It's not a very good picture, but you can kind of see a feather-like or saw edge on it. To me, that's one of the best ways to tell the difference between a moth and a butterfly. So I talked about some butterflies and moths only have one species of plant as their host plant to lay their eggs. We've probably all heard about the monarch butterfly's relationship with the milkweed plant, which is right here, the showy milkweed. That's also a butterfly milkweed. And the monarch caterpillars have adapted to tolerate and use the toxins in milkweed for their defense. Milkweed has a lot of toxins in it, but these caterpillars have learned to tolerate that and adapt to it, and that wards off insects eating them because they know they're poisonous. They do not thrive on any other plants. So I'm always happy to see in the park and around Estes, the showy milkweed is starting to bloom right now. It's a very nice plant to have in your yard. What I think is even more profound is the Borneman moth that depends on the yucca flower, and that flower depends on the moth. It's a very mutual relationship to survive. So what happens is, this is the yucca plant. It grows, once in a while you'll see it near Estes, but mostly in the foothills. The female moth gathers pollen from one flower. She flies to another flower and stuffs that pollen way down a tube. It's called the stigma. It's part of the female part of the flower. She stuffs it down the stigma into the ovary to ensure seeds will develop. And the Borneman moth has a special tool that she can pierce inside the ovary, and she lays her eggs. So she just ensured, and only Mother Nature could do this timing, the larvae hatches at the same time the seeds are mature. So those caterpillars have food from the beginning, the yucca seed. There's plenty of yucca seed to go around for wind and storms to move it and plant other yuccas. And then the moths survive eating the caterpillars, the yucca seed. So I think that's a very good example of very narrow range of host plants for the Borneman moth. It's the only flower that they lay their eggs on. Here's a western tiger swallowtail on a wood lily, a plum moth on the blacktip senecio. And I talked about flies and the bistort. We have lots of flies around, many species of flies. They're general pollinators, so they visit many species of plants. They're not picky. They like higher elevations, so they're good in the subalpine alpine zone. His attacinid fly, they're called, is the second largest fly. And he does have a bristles on his back and very metallic looking. Very pretty fly. He's there on a coneflower. And we know hummingbirds are good pollinators. They do see the color red. So planting something like the Eaton firecracker penstemon good choice. Any tubular flowers like the horse mint. We mentioned the horse mint before. And horse mint, any flower in the mint family, most of the wildlife around here will not eat mints. It's too strong of a taste for them. And beetles, with 30,000 species in the US, we have a lot of good beetles that pollinate flowers. They like a strong fragrance like the mint family. They like many tiny clustered flowers. And they shed pollen very easily with their little legs and bodies crawling from flower to flower. Here's a ladybug. We also have soldier beetles here and Pennsylvania leatherwings. And with 946 species of bees in Colorado, we have lots of bees. Honeybees, bumblebees, leafcutter bees, sweat bees, metallic bees. And they're fun to learn and watch on the flowers. Rocky Mountain bee plants, a good one to have in your garden, as well as golden glow. So flowers like penstemons, reds, bright blues, purples, lilies and iris, the goldenrod, and showy milkweed for the monarchs. Anything in the sunflower family, again, they provide good landing platforms for butterflies and moths and bees. And I always say the common dandelion, that comes up in the spring, just leave them. I think they're kind of pretty and the first food source for our pollinators, especially if it's pollinators are starting to come back earlier because maybe it's some climate change and so they need those dandelions. Shrubs like rabbit brush and golden currant are good to have in your yard. So I say mix it up. The more species of flowers, shapes, colors, and bloom times, the more diversity of pollinators you'll have. Mix up habitats, have some shade, full sun, trees, shrubs, mix with some native grasses, ground covers. Open spaces provide the nesting areas and the puddling that butterflies like. Accept slight damage that provide food for the larva stage. So, the caterpillars might eat a chunk out of the leaves, but they're not going to kill the plant. And use insecticides very scantily and carefully. Most garden insecticides can kill the caterpillar stages of the insect. And adult butterflies also can be killed by resting on insecticide-treated surfaces. So I do have, if anyone's interested, a catalog of BOCO Organics, and they sell organic supplies to put on your plants to ward off maybe like aphids and other insects. So you may look at this. I use something called garlic barrier a lot, and that works. And remember, ladybugs eat tons of aphids a day. So they even sell 8 ladybugs in the catalog. So I'd be like to answer any questions if I can, but I'd like to end the program with just some of my favorites that I have, if I can end the program. Those are my grandchildren. So I don't know if it's gonna work. It has music with it, but the music's not playing. So just enjoy some of the flowers that are out there. I'm sorry the music didn't play. It's the Colorado Trail music, so it's very pretty. But so I can take any questions if you have or anything you'd like to add and share with our group here tonight. Yeah, dandelions are a native flower. They're not on our not just weed list. And so again, they come up pretty early and they're important to our pollinators that arrive early. They're the only source of food probably at the time. And native thistles are really a beautiful flower and they're okay to have. Those are my grandchildren.
Fireweed. Now, does it get its name because it's one of the early plants after fires, or is it because the leaves turn brilliant red in the fall?
I've always
Like
heard
fire.
it's one of the first plants that will come up after a fire.
But their leaves turn brilliant
They are
red after the
beautiful.
fall, in the fall.
They
Yeah.
are beautiful in the fall.
Yeah.
They are blooming now at certain places, which I find terribly early, but they were blooming like a week ago. So they're up and out, but I've always heard it's one of the first plants to come up after a fire.
Do you know if the garden club is still in existence in
Yes.
Estes?
Yeah, I belong to the garden club.
Do you?
They've been not meeting
Yeah.
because of the library. We always meet at the library and the library's been closed and social distancing, so we haven't had any meetings since, I think there was one in March, and that was the last one, so, you can still join. We were hoping to take a wildflower hike, 5 or 6 people at a time, but, there are a wealth of information, the garden club here.
The community garden has some nice arrangements for pollinators and a variety
Yes.
of different flowers down there.
Yes, so we're in a great community to support our native plants and pollinators. very good community. Well, thank you for coming tonight.
Your,
Sorry for the technical difficulties.
your books are available?
Yes, I do have a few. I don't keep a lot, but I have the Wildflower book, the Rocky Mountain, and the Alpine book for sale.
Thank you, ma'am.
You're welcome.